Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Okay, Marco, quick question. On a scale from cozy cocoa to why do my eyelashes hurt, how cold are we going today?
We're firmly in eyelashes hurt territory, my friend. Think wind that argues with you and snow that files complaints.
Perfect, because nothing says welcome back like frostbite vibes. Hi everyone, it's the History AI podcast. I'm Chuck.
I'm Marco, and today we're trekking into the Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 hikers, 1 torn tent, and a mystery that still gives the internet goosebumps.
We'll keep it human, keep it curious, and yes, keep it warm enough to hold onto your fingers.
And if you're new here, this show runs on the latest AI architecture, so you get sharp, efficient research without the clunky boots.
Also, our episodes are evergreen. Press play in any order, and they'll still make sense 6 months from now.
All right, now that we're thawed and acquainted, if you're enjoying the show, tap subscribe and drop us a 5-star review. It really helps more curious folks find us and keeps this expedition going. And be sure to stay tuned after the episode for our original song, 9 Shadows on the Mountain.
Thanks, team. Packs on. Let's paint the scene properly. Winter 1959, Northern Urals, where remote means your last neighbor is a pine tree. Our crew is a group of Ural Polytechnic Institute students, mostly in their early 20s, led by Igor Dyatlov. These aren't weekend snowshoers, they're chasing the highest Soviet Trek certification at the time, the kind that says, I can navigate a blizzard with a slide rule.
And the planning is classic Dyatlov, thorough to the point of endearing. He stitches together a big group tent, rigs a collapsible stove for inside heating, and has everyone rotate skis under the tent floor for insulation. They've got layered clothing, felt boots, spare mitts, a first aid kit, compasses, maps, and enough oatmeal to make a Quaker blush. Several of them carry cameras and keep meticulous diaries, because in 1959, if you don't journal it, did you even freeze?
The route is a winter test piece. Train to the edge of nowhere, truck even farther, then skis on, heading toward Mount Otorten. They'll follow river valleys and Mansi trails, cross passes, and loop back after about 2 weeks. The idea is to sleep cold, move smart, and earn that coveted Grade 3 badge.
The vibe in those early diary entries is upbeat. Nerdy jokes, weather notes, who's hogging the stove space. You can feel the rhythm of a competent team clicking into place. They're tired in the good way. They joke about sore shoulders. They tease Igor for being a perfectionist. It's the kind of camaraderie that makes bad weather tolerable.
There's one early pivot that matters. The 10th member, Yuri Yudin, starts strong, but peels off with a flare-up of back and leg pain at a remote work camp. It's not dramatic, just a pragmatic, you all go on, I'll catch the next ride back. That goodbye ends up echoing through everything that follows, because he's the only one who will come home.
After Yudin turns back, the 9 push deeper into the hills. They cache some extra food and gear, a proper supply stash so they can travel lighter up high, and they aim for Kholat Syakhl, the mountain locals call the Mountain of the Dead. The name isn't a curse so much as a warning label. This is exposed country, all wind and snow slabs and distances that lie to you.
And Dyatlov's team knows it. They plan their days around daylight, cut steps when the slope gets crusty, and keep that big tent tight against the wind. There's no sense in the journals that anyone feels outmatched. If anything, they sound like they're relishing the challenge, counting kilometers, swapping lead, checking bearings, doing the quiet math of winter travel.
That's the frame I want everyone to hold on to. This isn't a doomed group bumbling into disaster. It's a skilled team doing most things right in a place where most things sometimes isn't enough. They've got the gear, the plan, the discipline, and the morale. And then the weather decides to audition for the villain role.
Exactly. Competent people, competent preparation in a landscape that doesn't care. That's our stage.
So from that solid rhythm, the day that becomes the last day begins like any other winter push. They break camp, they're moving through heavy snow, and the wind keeps shouldering them around. By late afternoon, they're edging up toward the open slopes of Kholat Syakhl. Visibility isn't just bad, it's changeable. The kind where the world flickers between, I can see the next rise, and I live inside a ping-pong ball.
And in those conditions, tiny navigational errors get magnified. You think you're angling for a saddle that will drop you toward tree cover, but the wind plasters over features and the compass bearing starts doing more work than your eyes.
Exactly. At some point, they realize they're higher and more exposed than planned. They've got a choice. Lose elevation to the tree line, which means backtracking blind into a crosswind, or commit to the slope and make a fast, efficient camp before darkness clamps down. They choose the slope. It's not a reckless choice. It's a mountaineer's calculation. Control the variables you can, protect the team, keep everyone together.
And the way they pitch that tent tells you it's a practiced crew. They cut into the hillside to create a platform, pack the snow, and set the fabric broadside to the prevailing wind to reduce flapping. Skis become anchors. Poles become ribs. They probably lay spare skis under the floor for insulation, the way Dyatlov liked it.
The stove is important here. They're carrying a collapsible, improvised unit that vents through the tent. It's a lifesaver in brutal cold, but it takes time to set up and manage. Evidence later suggests it wasn't assembled that evening. To me, that reads like a team moving quickly. Get shelter up, get food cooked on a simpler flame, and save the big comfort for the next stretch when the weather cooperates.
You can feel the routine. Someone's portioning kasha, someone else is checking the guy lines, somebody's rubbing warmth back into their hands and joking about who gets the warmest corner. It's the end-of-day choreography that says, we've done this before, we'll do it again tomorrow.
And we actually have a few breadcrumbs, those last camera frames and diary notes. They capture the ordinary texture of a hard day, snow building on the tent walls, wind finding every seam, and that particular tired calm that sets in once the shelter is up. No hint of dread, no foreshadowed disaster, just the business of being cold and competent.
Then the night arrives early in that latitude, and the mountain gets to write the next lines. The wind keeps loading the slope. The temperature drops to the kind of numbers that make your breath feel like broken glass. Inside the tent, it's cramped but familiar. Boots lined near the entrance, outer layers steaming as body heat chases off the frost, and 9 people sharing warmth, stories, and the quiet confidence that tomorrow is another working day in the hills.
Which is why the next part will always feel like a jump cut. Sometime in those small hours, something changes the math. Whether it's the snowpack settling with a low, unmistakable thump, or the tent wall suddenly pressing in under a dense slab, or wind ripping at the poles hard enough to feel like a collapse in slow motion, you can imagine the instant when routine flips into urgency.
And urgency in that environment is loud and simple. Move. You don't negotiate with a loaded slope or a failing shelter in the dark. You get the team out fast. You regroup where the ground isn't trying to kill you, and you sort details after you've put distance between you and the hazard.
That's the hinge of the story. A team that spent the day making smart, boring choices is forced, in one burst, into a chain of decisions they can't unwind. The tent is safety, but it's also a trap if the hillside is about to come down. The forest is shelter, but it's also far when the world has turned to static. In that snap of time, every gram of experience they have is fighting the elements, and the elements aren't in a mood to bargain.
So here's where the calm diary pages give way to a different kind of record: the search. Days pass with no word, and what starts as they're running late quickly becomes something's wrong. Students, instructors, local mansi hunters, and eventually soldiers fan out across the valleys. It's late February, sky like tin, wind carving the drifts into hard waves. On the 26th, a search team crests the slope of Kholat Syakhl and spots a low shape that isn't a snow dune. It's the tent.
And not just a collapsed tent, but a tent that looks interrupted. One side is partially buried, the poles still making this awkward rib cage. Their gear is inside. Boots, spare clothing, a loaf of bread mid-slice, little domestic snapshots frozen in place.
The eerie detail that always gets me: a flashlight on top of the snow by the tent's entrance, dusted with a skim of powder. When they click it, it still has juice. It's like the timeline is saying, they left in a hurry, but they expected to come back. And everyone leans in close and realizes the canvas isn't torn by weather. It's slashed from the inside out. The cuts aren't neat. They're the kind you make when your hands are clumsy with cold and the wall of your world is pressing in.
The searchers widen the circle and notice tracks leading downslope. Not the chaotic stampede you'd expect after a fight or an animal attack, more like a thread of individual footprints wandering away in pairs and singles. Some are in socks. Some show one boot, one bare foot. The wind has scoured the surface just enough to preserve them like a set of decisions imprinted on the mountain.
And here's the awful logic. You follow the tracks. They angle toward the dark line of the forest, the only windbreak for a long way. At the trees, the rescuers find the first human signs of that night's second act, a small fire site under a towering cedar, scorched patches in the snow, and scattered branches the size of broom handles, hacked down in a hurry.
That cedar is telling a story too. Some of its lower branches are snapped high off the ground, 3, 4, maybe 5 meters up, like someone climbed in frantic bursts, grabbing anything dry enough to burn. Beneath it lie the first 2 bodies, Doroshenko and Krivonoshenko, close enough to the embers to feel heat when there was heat to feel, stripped partly of outer layers, the way desperate cold strips you of good choices.
The search line starts to arc back toward the tent, and spaced along that invisible curve they find 3 more. Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin, each separated by dozens of meters, each positioned like a last, stubborn attempt to crawl or stagger upwind to the only shelter they knew. The distances feel cruel. You can stand where one fell and see where the next one almost got.
And then there's nothing for a while. Snow has hidden the rest. The teams start probing deeper into the forest, stabbing the drifts with long poles, bringing in dogs, listening for that dull, horrible thud that says something solid below. Weeks pass. When the thaw softens the top layers and the probes go farther, they find the ravine, more like a shallow gully choked with winter's debris, and under several meters of compacted snow the remaining 4, Dubinina, Thibault-Brignol, Zolotaryov, and Kolovatov.
That discovery opens a new set of questions because of where they are and what they're wearing. Some of them have layered up with clothing that clearly came from the others, scarves, jackets, pieces redistributed the way a small team will triage warmth. And the ravine itself is a trap in winter, soft-looking snow over hard features, edges that crumble underfoot. If you're moving in the dark, half blinded by blowing ice, it's the kind of place that swallows you without argument.
Back up at the tent, investigators are collecting details like they're clues in a riddle. There's an ice axe planted in the snow near the entrance. There's a row of boots left lined by habit and then abandoned against all sense. Food laid out but barely touched. Diaries and cameras tucked away where they'd be easy to grab, except they weren't grabbed. Every little domestic normalcy contrasts with that single, violent act of carving a door through canvas.
And the silence around the site is almost theatrical. No second set of tracks, no signs of a struggle, no animal prints. It's like the mountain and the wind were the only other witnesses, and they don't talk. What you're left with is a sequence written in footprints, firewood, and the geometry of fallen bodies, pointing from the tent to the trees and back again, like a compass needle that can't quite settle.
Which is why this part of the story gets under people's skin. The evidence is specific without being conclusive. You can stand at the tent and imagine the moment they cut. You can stand in the trees and feel the frantic heat of that fire. You can walk the line between and understand how far not very far can be when the wind is razoring your lungs. The searchers charted the outline. The mountain kept the center blank.
When the bodies come down from the mountain, the story shifts into clinic light, tables, tags, and the kind of details that don't blink. The first autopsies are on the 2 men from the cedar, and the doctors find what you'd expect from a night spent wrestling with cold. Deep frostbite, lungs and hearts showing stress from exposure, and those desperate, telltale burns on the hands like they'd leaned too close to keep the fire alive.
And their clothing situation tracks with that desperation too. Layers jumbled, some pieces missing, some opened at odd angles. Classic hypothermia choreography. People imagine tidy survival, but cold is messy. You fumble, you steam, you scorch your mitts, you do whatever gets sensation back for 10 seconds.
Then they examine the 3 on the slope, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin, spaced along that invisible line toward the tent. The findings still hum with exposure. Chilled organs, edema that comes with extreme cold, and for Slobodin, a skull fracture that looks like a fall, not a club. No defensive wounds, no shrapnel, Nothing that says someone else was here. It's the physics of a human body colliding with hard snow or hidden ice. Ugly, but not exotic.
And the forensic clock is slippery in a freezer. Rigor mortis behaves differently in sub-zero conditions. Lividity can be faint or locked in strange patterns, and the interval since death is a guess with frost at the controls. That's part of why the case spawns theories. Cold blurs the lines even in a lab.
The last four pull the rug out from under easy answers. They're found weeks later in the ravine, encased under meters of snow where meltwater has been running. Now you're mixing freezing, thawing, and moving water, nature's worst marinade for evidence. The injuries are severe on the inside, crushed ribs, a fractured skull, with surprisingly little on the outside. It's the kind of internal damage you see when a chest is loaded by a heavy broad force. Think car crash. Think a hard fall onto something unyielding under a cushion of snow.
And the clothing tells a story of triage. Some of them are wearing layers that once belonged to the men by the cedar. Socks over socks, a jacket clearly transferred, bits of scarf tied on where a button's long gone. That's not a brawl. That's a team squeezing warmth out of whatever they have left.
The missing soft tissues become the tabloid detail. An eye here, a tongue there, and people jump straight to melodrama. But in a watery ravine, with melt and refreeze and the small, patient appetites of scavengers, those losses are grisly but not mysterious. Edges soften, cavities open, and tissue goes where water wants to take it.
There's also the radiation wrinkle. A couple of garments register elevated readings, enough to raise eyebrows, not enough to glow in the dark. In 1959, contamination pathways aren't hard to imagine. Lab work, industrial materials, even everyday contact with sources we'd label more carefully today. It's an odd note, sure, but it doesn't conduct the whole song.
The medical reports, taken together, sketch a sequence that feels grimly coherent. The first group succumbs to cold near the fire after a long losing fight with exposure. The three along the slope fall short of the tent, their bodies carrying the signatures of collapse and impact on crusted snow. And the ravine group suffers what looks like a catastrophic fall or compression event in terrain that hides its hardness under a deceptive blanket.
Which is why the autopsy room doesn't hand us a single villain. You don't see a blast pattern, you don't see blade marks, you don't see trauma that argues for an attacker. You see environment turned up to 11, plus bad angles and gravity, forces that don't care if you're careful or kind.
And the one thing the doctors can't measure is the night itself. The noise, the wind, that instant when a wall sags or a slope shifts, and suddenly every good plan has to be rewritten at speed. The organs and bones tell us what happened to bodies. The gap between the tent and the trees tells us what happened to people.
All right, let's put the cards on the table and walk through the explanations, the way a good mountain guide walks a ridgeline, slowly, checking every foothold. The first step for me is the snow itself. If you've ever camped on a cut platform, you know you're making a bargain with the slope. You carve a shelf, you pack it, it looks solid, but you've also created a slick interface where a wind-loaded slab can slide later. Add hours of spindrift piling up, and you've built a trap that waits until you're asleep to spring.
Which is why that slab avalanche scenario has legs. People hear avalanche and picture a thunderous white wave, but a dense wind slab can be quieter, nastier, and local. If a block the size of a small car settles into your tent wall at 2 a.m., the interior suddenly feels like a vice. You don't debate zipper etiquette. You make an exit wherever your knife can reach, and you move. It explains the inside cuts, the rush, and the decision to regroup at the trees where the slope can't load you anymore.
And it lines up with the injuries without being a stretch. You've got a tent half suppressed by heavy snow where people may have been pinned or compressed for a moment, then a nighttime retreat over uneven ground that's hiding ice like glass under powder. Later, in the forest, you've got a ravine that looks like soft snow but has a hard floor. One misstep, especially with hypothermia fog creeping in, and a fall could jack your ribs without shredding your jacket.
The wind-only theory, katabatic winds, isn't a bad dance partner to that. Those dense cold flows can scream downslope out of nowhere. I've watched tents fold like postcards in gusts that weren't even the worst on the scale. If your shelter collapses and your poles are buckling in the dark, You might treat the whole site like a no-go and get off the face first, fix things later. It's the same logic as the slab. Get distance, get to the tree line, breathe, reassess.
People also bring up infrasound, the idea that turbulent wind around the ridge could generate low-frequency vibrations that mess with your body's sense of alarm. It's a clever thought experiment. Can the atmosphere spook a brain? Yes. Is it strong enough and focused enough on that slope that night to make 9 seasoned hikers slice out of a tent? That's harder to buy without a pile of measurements we just don't have.
And then there's the stove question, which doesn't get the same headline sizzle, but deserves a look. If they lit the collapsible stove and a spark set the tent smoking, or if fumes pooled, you could see a rapid, half-panicked evacuation for air. The wrinkle is that evidence suggests the stove wasn't assembled. Could they have tested it briefly, then broken it down? Maybe, but it's a thinner branch to step on, and it doesn't explain why they went so far from the tent before regrouping.
The military testing angle keeps coming back because of the error and that radiation footnote. Parachute mines dropped silently, shockwaves without shrapnel. Those phrases have a way of burrowing in. But the scene isn't burned, there's no crater, and the injury patterns look like falls and compression, not a blast wave. As for the radiation, a couple of garments reading a bit hot in 1959 doesn't make the whole mountain a secret range. Remember, some of these students had exposure to industrial and lab environments where contamination control wasn't what it is today.
Wildlife is the quickest theory to scratch out. There are no predator tracks, no claw rakes in the fabric, and the footprints away from the tent are too orderly for a panicked animal scramble. If a bear stuck its head in, you'd see chaos stamped all over the snow, and the canvas would be shredded from the outside, not slit from the inside.
And for the fight within the group idea, the scene just doesn't cooperate. You don't get 9 people fleeing a tent barefoot in the same direction because 2 of them argued over stove duty. There are no defensive wounds, no patterns that point to a human attacker. What you see is a team staying together as long as they can, sharing clothing as they weaken, and splitting only when the environment forces it.
Which leaves the folk horror guests, Yeti, UFOs. They make great campfire stories because they solve the riddle with a shrug and a ghost. But the case gets less mysterious, not more, the closer you stay to wind, snowpack, darkness, and human limits. The footprints are human. The injuries have human physics. The choices look like what trained people do when the environment flips the table.
So, if we're building a timeline that respects the clues, it sounds like this. A cut platform on a wind-loaded slope, plus a night of increasing stress. Either the slab shifts or the winds smash the tent, triggers a fast exit to the tree line. In the forest, they try to stabilize the situation. Fire, branches, clothing triage. Hypothermia starts sawing away at judgment. Some attempt to return to the tent and don't make it. Others search along the forest edge for better shelter, find that treacherous ravine, and suffer catastrophic but externally subtle injuries in a fall or under compacted snow.
And that's a story without villains, which is unsatisfying if you came for conspiracies, but painfully satisfying if you've spent a night on a mountain listening to the world shift around you. It's physics, weather, and the thin margin between we've got this and we don't. The evidence on the ground keeps pointing us back to that.
So let's knit the threads together like a good wool mitten. We've got a group that's skilled, methodical, and within shouting distance of their goals. They cut a platform on a wind-loaded slope, pitch tight, skip the big stove setup, and settle in. Sometime after lights out, the mountain changes the rules. Maybe the slab above them settles with that low, wrong-sounding thump. Maybe the tent wall bows in with the weight of dense snow. Maybe savage downslope winds start folding the poles like straws. Whatever the exact cocktail, the sensation inside the tent flips from cramped but fine to this shelter could trap us. In that instant, the smartest move isn't finesse, it's speed. Knives out, canvas sliced, bodies out into the night.
And that choice makes sense if you've ever felt a tent sag under a load you can't read. You don't do a committee meeting about zippers. You get clear of the hazard line, which on a loaded slope means down and away. You regroup where the ground isn't trying to slide and the wind has obstacles, trees, not drifts.
They angle to the forest because it's the only windbreak they can count on in a whiteout. Here's where cold starts running the clock. You've got 9 people whose core temps are dropping, hands going dumb, thinking getting fuzzy. They kick a fire to life under the cedar, tear at branches, someone climbs, snapping limbs higher than you'd expect because desperation lends reach. Now we see the triage that shows up later on their bodies. Clothing redistributed, socks over socks, a jacket that clearly started the night on someone else. That's a team taking care of a team.
And at the same time, someone says the thing everyone's thinking: we need the tent. The tent is heat, the stove, boots, better layers, and a position you understand. In daylight, that's a short, careful walk. In a night whiteout, it's a maze where every direction feels like upwind. 2 or 3 try for it anyway. The tracks we have, those lonely arcs across the slope, look like exactly that, a tough-minded pushback to home base that runs out of warmth before it runs out of distance.
Meanwhile, the group at the fire is losing a parallel fight. Hypothermia doesn't announce itself with a trumpet. It steals your judgment in small withdrawals. You get clumsy with flame. You scorch your hands because pain perception is skewed. You loosen layers because your nerves misfire and tell you you're hot. The men by the cedar lose ground there, not for lack of will, but because cold doesn't bargain.
The others press along the tree line looking for more shelter, a depression, a drift they can hollow, anything to cut the wind. That's where the ravine becomes the villain we didn't see coming. In winter, it's a stage set. The top looks like gentle snow, the deck below is ice and rock. One misstep, one cornice edge that crumbles, and you drop onto something that doesn't give. The injuries the doctors found, massive internal damage with the clothing intact, slot right into that picture. A heavy, broad force through snow dispersing the blow on the outside while breaking what's inside.
Let's fold in the oddities that keep people awake. The radiation on a couple garments? In that era, contamination happens. Lab work, industrial sources, even everyday contact we'd handle differently now. The numbers weren't the kind that light up the night, and they don't point a compass to secret tests when the scene lacks blast signatures. The reported orange or waxy skin tones? Cold, time, preservation chemicals, and the way bodies change in waterlogged snow can paint those colors without a conspiracy. Missing soft tissue in the ravine? Meltwater, scavengers, and the quiet, erosive work of freeze-thaw cycles explain more than any midnight intruder.
And the inside-out tent cuts? They're not the opening act of a thriller. They're triage under pressure. If you feel the shelter compress, if a pole spears down or the fabric locks under weight, the straightest line to out isn't the door, it's the nearest wall. That's not panic so much as fieldcraft at speed.
The footprints, too, orderly for a while, then gone. That's not a cosmic riddle, that's wind preserving the first minutes and erasing the rest. You can practically read the sequence. Initial calm retreat in pairs and singles, then drifted over confusion as the storm continues its edit.
When you map all of it onto a timeline, it becomes a cascade that doesn't require villains. The trigger on the slope forces evacuation. The forest buys time, but not enough. Attempts to return to the tent fail against distance plus weather. A search for better shelter intersects a hidden drop, and by the time dawn could have made the map legible again, the cold had already closed the book.
Which leaves us with a story that's tragic, precisely because it's plausible. Competent people doing mostly the right things in an environment that punishes small margins. The mountain didn't need a grand twist. It needed 3 or 4 bad factors to line up. A compromised camp platform, a brutal night, a whiteout's eraser, and a terrain feature waiting in the dark. Tie those threads, and the outline we've been staring at stops looking like a puzzle and starts looking like a path.
And that's the hardest part to accept if you came here hoping for a clean culprit. Physics is a boring suspect until you felt it up close. But on Kholat Syakhl, on that night, physics had all the motive and means it needed.
So after all that, you'd think the story would settle into a sober consensus. Bad weather, bad slope, bad luck. But this one never quite sits still. And I think that's because the evidence feels so intimate and so incomplete at the same time. You've got diaries with jokes still warm on the page, cameras that caught the last normal minutes, and then a tent carved open like a sentence cut mid-word. It invites people to fill in the blank.
And the blank is irresistible. The Soviet backdrop doesn't help. It was a world of partial files and careful phrasing. Toss in a few odd notes, like those elevated readings on a couple garments or the recovery photos with waxy skin tones, and suddenly the story sprouts side quests.
That's where the strange theories breathe. Parachute mines drifting silently in the night, secret weapons tests spooking the team, infrasound turning a tent into a panic chamber, the stove flaring and smoking them out. Even the folk horror guests, Yeti footprints, lights in the sky, shuffle on stage because the human brain would rather have a vivid culprit than a quiet cascade of physics. And online culture keeps the embers hot. New translations of old reports, fresh YouTube breakdowns. Somebody's cousin's uncle who swears a colonel said,
And we love a good campfire story. But when you line the theories up against the footprints, the cuts, the injuries, the weather, the unseen hand gets smaller and the environment gets bigger. It doesn't make the tale less dramatic, it makes it more human. 9 people whose competence couldn't outvote the conditions.
The irony is that the weirdness keeps the story alive, while the simple chain of events gives it weight. We return to it because it's spooky, and we stay with it because it's instructive. Every time I reread the case, I end up thinking like a trip leader. How do you build bigger margins? For me, it's redundancy you can touch. 2 independent light sources per person, fire starters that still work when your hands are clumsy. A spare map and compass, even if you have a fancy device.
And I hear the snowpack talking. If you cut a platform on a wind-loaded face, you're changing the structure you're sleeping on. Probe it, watch the loading, and if the weather stacks against you, move. The safest tent is the one pitched where gravity is bored. I'd add whiteout discipline too. Mark camp with a tall wand or a line. Agree on a fixed bearing to and from the tree line before dark, and set a turnaround rule that isn't negotiable just because morale is good.
The forest piece lingers for me. If you're forced off a slope at night, micro-shelter fast and close beats a heroic search for perfect shelter far away. A shallow snow trench, a quick windbreak of branches, everyone huddled in the smallest footprint you can manage. Those choices buy time while brains are still clear. And clothing becomes a group asset, not individual property. You shift layers to the coldest core first, and you keep doing that as conditions change.
It's also the humility lesson. Even if you're strong and trained and dialed, fatigue plus cold will start rewriting your math. The best defense is deciding your rules while you're warm and then obeying those rules when you're not. That's unsexy compared to secret tests and monsters, but it's how you get home.
And maybe that's why Dyatlov endures. The strange theories add neon to the marquee, but the heart of it is a clear mirror. Competence isn't invincibility. Plans are only as good as the conditions that let them live, and nature only needs a few aligned factors to turn a routine camp into an emergency. We can argue parachute mines or infrasound forever. The mountain is unmoved either way.
Which, weirdly, is hopeful. If the villain is physics, we can practice the antidotes. Better terrain choices, cleaner communication, more conservative thresholds, and a little less ego when a slope wants us to sleep somewhere else. That doesn't solve every problem, but it stacks the deck back in our favor.
And it honors the hikers too. Not by mythologizing them into a conspiracy, but by learning from the choices they had to make in a night that gave them almost none. The mystery can keep breathing. Stories do that. But the lesson can travel with us the next time the wind starts to rise. And that's our hike for today. If you dug it, please subscribe and drop that 5-star review. It genuinely helps the show grow.
Got a theory or a topic you're dying for us to explore? Hit us on social. Handles are in the show notes. We read everything.
Also, we've got new merch, hoodies, mugs, the works, and the links in the show notes. Perfect for staying cozy while you argue Avalanche mechanics with your friends.
Remember, all our episodes are evergreen, so share this with someone now or 6 months from now. It'll still land.
Big thanks to you for listening, and to the latest AI architecture under the hood, keeping our research fresh and the pacing tight.
I'm Chuck.
I'm Marco, and this was the History AI Podcast.
Their laughter arose, then turned to cries. A fire burned in snow and pine. 9 souls crossed that mountain line. Tracks in white that fade away, a diary frozen in yesterday. Canvas torn beneath the frost in Dyatlov Pass. Something was lost. So 9 shadows on the mountain high. No one left to tell us why. A secret buried in the snow, and we may never know. Bootless feet in frozen sand, hands that reached but found no hand. A fire gone cold, a fear untold. Their stories whispered, bodies cold. The tent was cut from deep within, a flight from something or from sin. The storm can't hide what eyes have seen, a flash of light, a death unseen. 9 shadows on the mountain high. No one left to tell us why. A secret buried in the snow, and we may never know. Some say the sky tore open wide. Some say the army tried to hide. Some blame the sound the wind became. Some whisper madness took their names. But up there where the cold winds blow, the truth sleeps deep beneath the snow. And though we search, the answers fade like footprints lost the storm once made. 9 shadows on the mountain high. No one left to tell us why. A mystery carved in ice and stone. They climbed the ridge but died alone. In Dyatlov Pass, the wind still cries through frozen woods beneath pale skies. 9 shadows drift, they never sleep. The mountain secrets theirs to keep.